The boy never asked questions, but his silence always sounded like one. It filled the space between floorboard and ceiling, between the whistle of kettle and the rust of hinges, between the wind and the dusk. He sat with his knees drawn up on the edge of the porch, as if the wood knew his weight by now, as if it held him like something half-remembered. His eyes, those eyes, belonged to a man whose name wasn't spoken in town anymore. Not in church, not in the saloon, not even by the preacher who once tried to ask where the man was buried, and got nothing back but a slammed door and the hurried clop of hooves fading westward. No one came to visit. The trail that led to their land was dry, cracked and curved in on itself like it regretted being there. One side of it, the north side, was sunburnt, the grass yellowed to ash. The other held a leaning fence, half swallowed by wild mesquite, its wire rusted and torn like a wound long healed wrong. Everything on the land had a scar, even the wind, especially the wind. It changed direction each evening at the same hour, as if honoring some unspoken routine. And when it did, the boy always looked west, always. Inside, the cabin lived like a memory. The air smelled of coffee grounds, cold ash, and loneliness baked deep into the walls. Above the door, a hat hung on a crooked nail, untouched, unmoved, but never dusty. Not once. No one dared touch it, not even his mother. She moved through the rooms like someone who remembered too much, too often. Her hands folded laundry that didn't belong to anyone living. Her eyes traced the floor as if expecting to see blood or boot prints. She spoke only when needed, and when she did, her voice dropped. Not out of shyness, but like someone who feared that sound itself might wake something better left sleeping. The boy saw it all, felt it all. Children know when adults lie, even in silence, especially in silence. The first time someone asked him about his father, he just blinked, slow, steady, and turned back to the porch rail, like he hadn't heard, like he had, like it didn't matter. But later that night, he stood barefoot in the middle of the kitchen, holding a hammer too heavy for his wrists, prying up the third floorboard beneath the pantry. There, wrapped in twine and oil-stained paper, lay a letter, unopened, unsent, address line blank, ink faded by time, not weather. He didn't open it either, he just held it, then put it back. Some things, even children understand, aren't meant to be read, just remembered. The townsfolk kept their distance, not out of cruelty, but out of reflection. The boy reminded them of what they buried, regrets, rumors, the kind of truths that don't rot but settle. He looked like his father, in the shoulders, in the quiet, in the way he never asked for more than he was given. At the general store they spoke only to the widow. Even then their words came like mail delivered late, soft, reluctant, wrapped in guilt. Once, a traveling photographer came to town, offered portraits for a coin and a name. When he asked the boy's mother if she wanted a family photo, she said nothing, just turned. But the boy watched her shoulders. They rose, then dropped, not like breathing, like surrender. The photographer left that same afternoon. So the house stood, perched on dry Texas clay. A boy with his father's eyes sat in its shadow. The wind came each night and shifted west, always west. He didn't know what he was waiting for, only that it hadn't come yet. Only that something still lingered in the air, like the aftertaste of smoke or the echo of footsteps that never returned. He arrived without sound, without trail dust on his coat, without the look of someone needing shelter or favor. The kind of man you wouldn't remember in a crowd, and yet the boy noticed him the moment he stepped onto the porch. Not because he knocked, he didn't. He just stood there, eyes steady, boots still. The boy opened the door like he'd been expecting him, though neither spoke. The wind paused as if to listen. The stranger didn't ask for coffee, didn't make small talk, just sat at the edge of the table like a man who once knew what comfort was, but couldn't quite trust it anymore. His eyes scanned the room, not quickly, not nervously, but like someone reading the last few lines of a story they'd once tried to forget. When his gaze fell on the mantel, it stayed there too long. Too long for a man with no questions. Too long for someone who claimed not to know them. The photograph above the hearth, curled at the edges, sun-faded, showed a man with eyes like dusk and a jawline cut from bone. The boy had never touched the frame, though he dusted everything else. That day he watched the stranger watching it, and something in him curled. Not in fear, not in anger, but in a way that felt like remembering something he was never told. The mother poured water into a chipped mug, then left the room. The stranger didn't touch it. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulled out a knife, dull, worn, and sharpened it slow, like the act meant something, like he was cleansing thought with steel. The scraping against whetstone echoed softly in the room. The boy flinched once, not at the sound, but at the silence that followed. When the knife was done, he set it down. Not on the table, but on the windowsill where light could catch it. Then he stood. The boy thought he might say something, anything, but the man just nodded toward the photo. not at it, toward it, then walked out into the heat like a shadow stepping back into the body it left behind. Later that night, while the house slept in half light and breath, the boy returned to the window sill. The knife was still there, but it wasn't the blade that stilled his fingers, it was the handle. Worn smooth, chipped near the base and tied with a strip of blue cloth. He'd seen that cloth once, in a box of things the mother kept in the back of her closet, things not meant to be touched, things that still carried scent. He didn't take the knife, just stared at it, long enough to feel the pulse in his thumb. There are silences that beg to be broken, and there are others that wait to be heard. The boy didn't speak of the stranger, didn't ask who he was. But when he lay in bed that night, he stared at the ceiling as if expecting it to answer, his breath shallow, his palms open, listening not for sounds, but for what they left behind. It was the folding of the towel that changed first, small, ordinary, easy to miss. But on Tuesday morning she folded 2 towels instead of 1, and paused with the second still in her hands, held like something she wasn't sure belonged anymore. She didn't look confused, just distant, as if her body had moved faster than her memory. She laid the towel down anyway, not folded right, not folded wrong, just laid down. There was a quiet in the house that day that hadn't been there before, not the hush of mourning that had long since settled into the walls like dust. This was a different silence, a kind that vibrated just beneath surfaces, in the way she stirred the beans slower, in the way the floor creaked when she paced, but never moved toward the front door. The boy noticed. He noticed everything. He watched the way she forgot to salt the bread, then over-salted it the next time, the way she let the chickens wander longer before calling them back, the way her hair, always tied and tucked, now fell loose around her shoulders by evening. She didn't speak of these things, but grief never needs to speak. It has its own language, and children, especially children who've been taught not to ask, learn to read it better than books. That afternoon the boy sat by the stove, tying a bootlace that wouldn't knot. She passed behind him and touched his shoulder, just for a second, just enough to steady him. It was the first time she'd done that in weeks, maybe months, maybe ever. Her hand stayed a moment too long, then left like it regretted being brave. Later, as she scrubbed the tin plates clean and quiet, he asked, voice low, nearly broken by the question, "Why don't we visit where he's buried?" The plate slipped from her hand, but didn't fall. She caught it mid-air, fingers wet and trembling. Then she set it down gently as if it were made of bone. Her back remained turned, her breath shallow, and though she didn't answer, the boy saw her eyes in the reflection of the window, wide, wet, but not from tears, from memory. She didn't speak to him for the rest of the evening, not out of anger, out of protection. Some truths aren't lies, they're shields. Women in places like this, dry, empty, raw with sky, learn early that silence isn't always the absence of truth. Sometimes it's the only way to keep a child's heart from collapsing under the weight of what he shouldn't have to know. Some things, even God folds gently, tucks away, and buries beneath the tongue. That night, she sat on the porch long after the boy had gone to bed, her shawl pulled tight, her fingers tangled in its threads. The stars above blinked without rhythm. The wind shifted west. She didn't look that way. She didn't need to. Not yet. The discovery was quiet, almost accidental. A creak in the floorboard, the faint scrape of wood against nail. The boy's hands, still small but steady, pried up the third board in the corner near the pantry, where the shadows pooled thickest. Beneath the loose plank, a tobacco tin lay buried, its metal worn, edges jagged with rust. Inside, a single bullet rested like a secret waiting to be told. He held it carefully, the cold weight of the metal resting heavy against his palm. It wasn't the first time he'd felt the sharpness of something hidden beneath the surface. The bullet was a whisper from a past the town never spoke of, a language only those who'd seen war could understand without words. Orders given by men with clean hands, voices hushed but eyes darker than dirt. An old man in town whose beard hung like grey river moss and whose voice cracked like dry timber, once let something slip in a careless moment. He didn't fall, he said, gaze fixed on the fading sunset. He dropped his hand like he wanted it. The boy remembered the words, even if he didn't understand them fully. A hand letting go, not in defeat, but in surrender. The bullet felt heavier than any truth spoken out loud. It carried with it the weight of what couldn't be undone, no matter how many years passed, no matter how many prayers were whispered into the night. The boy sat still, the tin cupped between his hands, the silence stretching wider than the plains beyond the cabin. He thought about the man in the photo, the father whose name no one dared say, and for the first time, he saw not a hero, but a man who was just tired, tired enough to let go. Outside, the wind rose and the grass bowed to it, soft and slow like a benediction. The boy tucked the bullet back beneath the floor, but something inside him had already changed. The story was no longer buried. It was beginning to breathe. The sheriff arrived late, as he always did, boots heavy in the dust, coat stiff with the weight of years and secrets. He knew who had held the shovel, the one who buried a man no one spoke of, but he also knew why they did it. There are truths too raw for tongues, too sharp for daylight, so the sheriff carried his regret quietly, like a whiskey bottle sealed tight, taking sips when no one watched. No reports were filed, no questions asked. The town lived in a fog of collective silence, each door creaking with the same tired confession. The past rusted with dignity behind closed shutters, and the sheriff, like everyone else, wore the weight of what was left undone beneath his badge. He stood long by the graveyard fence, eyes tracing the line where wild grass swallowed the earth whole. The uniform felt heavier on him there, not for the cloth, but for the burden it carried. It pressed down like the memories he carried, faces he couldn't save, orders he didn't give, hands he wished had stayed empty. Sometimes he would sit alone on the porch of the jailhouse, staring out at the prairie as the sun dipped low and bled into the horizon. The regret seeped into his bones, a quiet ache that neither drink nor prayer could ease, yet he never spoke of it, never offered confession. The shame was his alone, a shadow he wore silently. And so the town lived with its secret, the sheriff smelling regret more than whiskey, knowing that some sins are never washed away, only carried carefully from one soul to another, like a slow-burning fire beneath the dust. He tried it on once, that coat, the one his father had worn, heavy and worn, the fabric smelling faintly of cedar and smoke, carrying the weight of a man long gone. The sleeves swallowed his hands, the shoulders hung too wide. He folded the cuffs twice, as if that could shrink the past to fit a boy still growing into the shape of loss. The coat carried more than scent. It held dried blood, stiff and dark, hidden deep in the lining, a trace of a story no one spoke aloud, but everyone knew. The mother washed it once quietly without asking. The soap and water stripped the fabric of its years, but it couldn't wash away the stain. He never wore the coat outside again. It hung by the door, a silent witness to the distance growing between mother and son. That evening their silence filled the room louder than any argument. No words were spoken. None needed to be. The space between them was a quiet wound, growing wider with each breath. She watched him try to fill a space too large, and he felt the coat's weight settle not on his shoulders, but on his heart. The coat was a symbol mistaken for comfort, something to hold on to, yet too heavy to carry. And in that silence, between the folded sleeves and the unspoken grief, they both understood the truth too fragile for voice. Some things must be left undone, some stories left hanging in the air, waiting for a time when wounds no longer sting. The barn always smelled of old hay, sweat and memory. For years it had kept its secrets beneath the rafters and behind dusty beams, the air thick with everything unspoken. That night, flames licked the sky in a hush of confession. It started slow, a curl of smoke, a restless crackle. The fire rose the same night the boy, for the second time, asked about the grave. No one saw who struck the match. No one needed to. Inside, the fire found more than tools and empty crates. It found letters, folded, yellowed with age, edges singed by regret. It found sketches, small and careful, of a man's hand and a boy's crooked smile. It found a final will, unsigned, the words bleeding into ash, as if even the paper could not hold the story any longer. The timing felt like an answer, or a warning, or both. Guilt burns better than wood. The flames worked their way through every corner, stripping what little was left of the past. By the time the neighbors saw the smoke and came running, all that remained was ruin and memory pressed into the earth. Yet, not everything turned to ash. In the soot and heat, the boy found a single horseshoe, bent, blackened, and still warm to the touch. He lifted it from the rubble, hands shaking, and felt a strange, wordless relief. Some things survive what should have destroyed them. Some shapes, once broken, never fit quite the same. But they endure, marked by fire, held together by whatever is left. The night grew silent again. The wind scattered the last embers across the fields, and the darkness wrapped around the boy and his mother like a heavy blanket. The barn, now hollow, seemed almost lighter for having given up its ghosts. Yet, as they stood together in the cooling air, they knew the real burning had only just begun. He returned just before dawn, when the mist still clung low to the fields and every shadow felt twice as long. No one saw him arrive, but the boy sensed his presence as sure as breath. The stranger stood at the edge of the yard, hat brim low, boots dark with dew. He did not come to the door. He did not speak. His goodbye was a gesture, a tip of his hat to the empty air, a small weight left behind in the dirt. He turned and walked away without looking back, his shape dissolving into the half-light, as if he'd never been there at all. After the sun lifted its tired head, the boy wandered to where the earth was freshly turned. The ground felt softer beneath his steps, reluctant to hold memory. There, hidden among tangled grass and dust, he found two objects, a pocket knife and a wedding ring, tied together with a strip of horsehair. The knife's handle, worn and smooth, fit perfectly into his palm. The ring, simple and battered, shone even in the pale light, an answer and a question in one. He did not run to his mother. He did not call out. The meaning came to him not in words, but in the ache between ribs, in the echo of old footsteps on bare wood. Some truths arrive only in fragments, stitched together by silence and time. The boy understood deep in his bones what could not be said aloud. Sometimes fathers leave not to abandon but to protect, sometimes from the world, sometimes from themselves. He pocketed the knife and slipped the ring into his shirt, holding them close. They did not make him whole. They did not close the story. But in that silent offering, he felt the weight of a love that chose distance over destruction and the cost of mercy written in every scar. The trail where the stranger had walked was already fading, blurred by the shifting morning wind. But the lesson remained, a lesson passed without words, to a boy growing old before his time. The sun stretched thin across the prairie, morning pulling gold from the weeds where grass refused to grow. The boy stood there where the ground stayed stubborn and bare, clutching the ring in his fist, skin imprinted with its memory. He never buried it. He just held it, sometimes loose, sometimes tight, like a secret kept for both the living and the lost. From the porch his mother watched. Her hands, always busy, were still for once, folded in her lap. Her eyes were softer now, less like stone, more like earth after rain. She saw the boy as he was, not a shadow of a father, not a question without answer, but himself, quiet, marked, unfinished, yet enduring. A single boot print lay in the dust beside the path, deep enough to gather morning dew. By noon the water dried and the mark faded. No one stepped there again. Near the door a new hat hung from the old nail, smaller, untouched, the past honored with space, not imitation. The boy did not speak about his father. He never would. But every day he rode the same trail west, horse hooves stirring up memories, not ghosts. He was alone, but not lost. The silence between him and his mother held more comfort than words could manage. A quiet knowing, a gentle acceptance. And when the wind shifted, as it always did at sunset, he turned his face into it, breathing deep the dust, the ache, and the hope of something beyond. He rode toward the horizon, carrying both the weight and the lightness of what had come before. The world stayed silent. The story stayed unfinished. But the boy, he moved forward, carried by love that could not be named, and by a belonging that finally did not ask for proof. The wind shifted west one last time, and this time he did not watch. He rode,